1 Kings, session 33. And we end not only chapter 11, but we are coming to the end of the life of Solomon. It says, and the rest from verse 51 of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all of Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers, was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead. So, number one, I said in the previous session, I didn't see any evidence that Solomon ever repented or came back to Yahweh. Many people wonder if Solomon will be in the kingdom one day. I have to say that if you read the rest of the books of Solomon, if we read what he said, for instance, in Ecclesiastes, he says everything he has done, all his wisdom, all his magnificent construction projects, all his money, all the good food and the good wine that he had, as well as all the wisdom and the good judgment and the great behavior, everything he did in his life is vanity. And at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, we see that Solomon said, after he has bemoaned the vanity of this life, even as the most handsome, most richest, most wise man ever, man with the most wives ever, most popular in high school, even as that, he says everything is vanity. He says the conclusion of this whole vain life, not only his own life, but life on earth. What is the conclusion? And at the end, he says, it is to fear God and to obey his commandments. So if I read the rest of the books of Solomon, if I read Song of Solomon's, which is such a unbelievable messianic picture, you read Proverbs, all the wisdom he gives to children. He says, it is just not worth it to ignore your father's Torah. It will only lead you down the road of in the case of Proverbs, the woman that stands at the opening of her house and she wants to lead you down into the darkness. So, my personal opinion is Solomon is going to be in the kingdom. I mean, that's just my opinion. I think you realize the conclusion of everything, even the fact that God took away his kingdom. His kingdom is going to be split in two. His enemies came to rule over him. They didn't make war with him. They just bested him. Everything he saw that was the outflow of his own actions. He realized it was vanity. He realized there's nothing that stands forever. Everything under the sun is temporarily. But the earth stands forever. So if you read Ecclesiastes 1, you can either feel depressed or you can be so inspired because this earth that God created, this earth where he walked, not only in Eden, not only on Mount Sinai, but in the flesh in Jerusalem, this earth that will be cleansed, this earth that will be burnt up with fire, this earth remains forever. Because what is above earth, what is on the earth, all the rubbish, all the humans, all the sin, all death and destruction, even all of nature will be burnt up. Even nature itself holds its breath and cannot wait for the appearance of the sons of God so that God can recreate this earth, restore this earth to its original beauty as it was in Eden. This earth stands. The ground, the foundation of this world, not this world, this earth. This world is going to be totally destroyed. Nothing's going to remain. Even Satan himself, the ruler of this world, will be destroyed. But the earth that God created with his own mouth stands forever. And everything we do on top of this earth, under the sun, in this space, under the sun, on top of the earth, if you have a biblical cosmology view, that is all vanity. But our feet stands on this earth. And although the grass is going to be burned up, the earth beneath it, this rock on which God has built this earth that he calls Eretz earth, that stands. And he will cleanse it, he will restore it, he will renew it, and he will himself come down and live on this piece of soil that he made. So, the conclusion of Solomon's whole life, he had major, wonderful experiences. He was highly motivated. He was, what's the right word? Loved, endeared, and valuable to so many people. And he was loved by Yahuwah. He had a great relationship. But Yahuwah allowed him to experience the flip side of that as well, where he came to be hated for his idolatry by Yahuwah, hating what he has done. He became to be loathed and despised by the people because the enemy started pestering them. He probably felt a lot of shame because maybe some of the very good people in the land looked upon their king, who was busy offering incense to pagan goddesses. So he experienced both sides of the coin. And the conclusion of his entire life, the conclusion of all that is good and all that is bad, is that we must fear God and obey his command. It's absolutely beautiful. I see that Solomon also reigned 40 years. We know 440, 400, 4,000, hugely messianic picture. We also see in the book of Judges how many of God's beautiful judges reigned for 40 years. Even David reigned for 40 years. It's, it's exactly the same amount of time. It's not 39 or 41. It's amazing how these things just work out together to paint this beautiful messianic picture. All right, now we come to one of the biggest and most important things for me personally. I have spent such a huge amount of my time in this ministry to try and make people see who the church is, to try and make people see who's Jew, who's Gentile, who's Israel. And this is where we finally get to the historical context of where this actually happened. Yahweh has been warning about this. He warned about this in Deuteronomy 4. He warned about this in the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. We see this over and over again in Joshua and Judges, and even in Samuel, especially in Samuel. This kingdom has not been split yet. But even since Genesis, there was a split in the kingdom. You had the brothers that was um, led by Judah. Judah was the ruler. He was not the oldest, but he was definitely the strongest. And he was like the leader of the brothers. And then you had Joseph, and he went away to Egypt. And you already have this split in the kingdom. And you know, if you've done my Genesis, the two Yahweh's Genesis studies, you know that when Jacob went over the Yabok River, he did split his family in two. And that was already the prophetic picture of the 12 sons of Israel being split up into two groups. And we see these two groups doing various things in Judges, in Joshua, how they're being separated. We see the leaders of these two groups. The leader of Judah is Caleb, the leader of Ephraim is Joshua. Amazing how these two men, how they are picturing for us this in-base saints of Yahweh that's coming together. Out of all the tribes that these two leaders, not only two leaders, but the only two loyal men to Yahuwah who came out of Egypt. The only way in which they could stand from Egypt throughout the 40 years in the wilderness and go into the promised land, the only two adult men, was because not only for who they were and the different spirit that was inside of them, but because they are carrying a prophecy for all generations in the future to see. It is Judah and Ephraim, Judah and Ephraim, Judah and Ephraim, all over the Bible, all throughout the New Testament, all throughout the words of Yeshua. You've got the olive tree, you've got the fig tree, you've got the big fat sheep, and you've got the lost sheep. You see this, and people that has been doing these studies now for the last 5, 6, 7 years, they started to see as well. Every time you open your Bible, you just cannot help to see how this kingdom of Yahweh is typified in the 12 tribes split into two. And that is why pray what Yeshua taught us to pray so many times. Our Father, Yahweh in heaven, may your name be glorified. May your kingdom come. Because the Bible says, only when Ephraim and Judah were calling out for the Messiah to come back together in truth and spirit, only when Ephraim has come out of her exile and is reunited with Judah, can the ultimate wedding feast happen, and Israel can be married again. She was divorced in the house of Israel, not the nation of Israel. And when the kingdom of God is restored, only when the prodigal son comes back can he be in the house with his father, together with his older brother. But as long as there's animosity and anger and fighting again between these two brothers, it will not happen. And yet the Bible prophesies very clearly. Then restoration happens. All the anger and fighting between Judah and Ephraim be over. The jealousy of Judah will subside, and the vexing will have over Ephraim will no longer be. There will be one nation with one king. That's why understanding where this happened, physically, with Rehoboam and Jeroboam, seeing in the previous session how even before the actual split, there was already this spiritual split. I mean, we remember even in the time of David, remember it wasn't really, the kingdom wasn't really split, but yet, for how many years? Almost 7, right? David ruled over Judah. Well, the house of Israel, the 10 tribes, no, wasn't under him. And it took a lot of heartache and tears to let the whole kingdom be restored under David. So let's follow over this. 1 Kings 12, and Rehoboam went to Shechem. For all Israel come to Shechem to make him king. I don't have to remind you about Shechem. We have studied Shechem in detail. This was mostly the book of Genesis. We came to Shechem, took us all the way to the woman at the well at Shechem. It took us to the Valley of Decisions with Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. If you don't know what I'm talking about, contact me via the website. 2 trees, number 2 trees in the garden, .co.za. And ask me so that I can send you these studies to do. So it came to pass when Jeroboam the son of Nebat was in Egypt, heard of it, for he has fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt. Not to remember in the previous session when Solomon wanted to kill him, he fled to Egypt. We saw the huge significance in that. So when Jeroboam heard that Rehoboam is going to Shechem to be made king, he came back. So they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spoke unto Rehoboam and said, Your father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore, make you the grievous service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us lighter, we will serve thee. So, what is this about? This is about taxes. So Solomon, yeah, Yahuwah, I think Yahuwah made him more than rich enough. Yahuwah promised him riches. He didn't really have to tax his people as well. Maybe he did that during the times of his evil, dark times. The Bible does talk about bringing your tithing to the temple, but it doesn't talk about taxes. So Solomon did make the people work in hard labor, and he taxed them quite grievously. And I'm wondering why. Yahuwah gave him a lot of money, made him the richest man on earth. He was supposed to use that money for good, for his house, for the temple, for looking after the people of Israel, giving them good walled cities, safe cities, and a good army that can protect them and have these sons and daughters that didn't have to, slaves and stuff. Um, then he started marrying all these hundreds and thousands of pagan women. And as you saw, he had to build his Egyptian wife. He also built her a palace. So I think Yahweh's money isn't supposed to go for that. So he started taxing Yahweh's people. I think he taxed the people in his dark place. So Jeroboam, and the easiest way to remember, Jeroboam became king of 10 tribes towards the north. Rehoboam is the king of the 2 tribes in the south. And the best way to remember who's who, because that's not exactly the same. Rehoboam, it's either J or in front. Can't remember where I learned this, but I can't remember his surname. Let it come to me. In the alphabet, next to one another. So just remember, the R is next to the S. Rehoboam is king over the S. So although Jeroboam knows that the prophet told him God is going to make him king over the 10 northern tribes, he was still a good servant in the house of David. He was a servant to Solomon, and now he is willing to be a servant to Rehoboam. So this man also started out really good. He did nothing. He wasn't in rebellion against Solomon. Solomon wanted to kill him, the same as David. Saul wanted to kill David. David didn't come into rebellion against Saul. Neither did Rehoboam come into rebellion with Solomon. Jehovah chose them. And for Saul and Solomon to try and kill the one that Jehovah chose, it's not going to work. But here we can see the royalty still inside of Rehoboam. When he says to, sorry, Jeroboam, he comes to Rehoboam and he says, you've now been made king. So the taxes are too much. Your people are going hungry. We cannot survive like this. You have to make the taxes less. The temple is built. All these concubine houses and palaces and stuff is built. You live in the beautiful palace that your father Solomon has built. The land is at peace. Everything is going well. Yahweh is blessing us. Please make the taxes lighter. It is killing us. And he said, depart you for 3 days and then come to me again. So the people departed. All right, so Rehoboam is asking for 3 days to go and think about it. Hopefully, he's going to pray about it so that he can come back with a wisest answer and be a good man like his grandfather David and a wise man like his father Solomon. So King Rehoboam consulted with the older men, right? These men that also stood before Solomon his father when he had yet lived. And he asked them, how would you advise? How do I answer my people according to this question about the taxes? The Bible talks about wisdom comes with age. Grysheid kom of wat wysheid kom met grysheid. Wisdom comes with grey hairs. And these men saw the rise of King David's kingdom and how it blossomed in the time of Solomon. But they also saw the fall and the sin of Solomon. These were the wise old men that were like the counselors to David and to Solomon. And we see in the rest of the book of the Kings, they also always had counselors. And if you watch many of these older Bible movies and stuff, you'll always see these old men. They still sit around the fire with the prophets, and they contemplate the words of God, and they teach their children and their grandchildren all the things that happened when God's mighty hand brought us out of Egypt, and Joshua brought us into the promised land, and all these things. So the older men are part of that, let's call it a generation, that is still rooted in Yahuwah. Even in this world today, um, honestly, for the last 2 generations, probably, people stopped going to churches and stuff. But still, even in today's modern life, your older people are still the wiser ones. They are still the ones that would rather do the right thing than go after pleasure and money. When you grow older, your money becomes less important because you've worked yourself to death to make money. And now that death is approaching, you need all the money you've made to just keep you alive. Not hopefully with pharmakia though. So the older you become, the closer you are drawn to your day of death, and therefore you are drawn closer to your God who made you. So choosing between listening to older people and listening to your friends who's partying with you and drinking and having a good time with you, all they want, like with the prodigal son was supposed to listen to his older father, but he also listened to his friends that was partying with him. And the moment his money was over, the moment his friends sucked him dry, the moment they had a good time and he was no longer useful, they discarded him. And this I've seen in my life. When I didn't really have good friends, I just had friends that surrounded me because we were always partying. And many times, I would sponsor the drinks or whatever. The moment I stopped paying for everybody's drinks, they stopped being my friends. And then you're all alone. But it's because you are surrounding yourself with fools, with pleasure seekers, with greedy, shallow, unvaluable people. Like here in the first Kings chapter 12. So these old men said, if you want to be a servant unto your people this day, and if you want to serve them, because remember, what is a king? A king is supposed to rule, but as a servant. Because you are serving them. In your rulership, you are doing what is best for them. Yeshua said, I am your king, yet I wash your feet like a servant. For those of you who wants to be big, you must be small. You need to be the servant of all. By this you know that you love your brother when you lay down your life for him, when you lay down what you want to do so that it can benefit your people, God's people at the end of the day. Let God's will be done. If you want to serve your people, then answer them and speak good words to them. Then they will be your servants forever. I mean, it's just logical. If you're a good king, your people will be your servants forever. But if you're not going to be a good king, they will not serve you forever. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and he consulted with the young men that have grown up with him and which stood before him. So you can just transport yourself back in time. I love to watch old Bible movies so I can physically see this happening. Think about this. He had a lot of young men that surrounded him. One of the Bible movies I've watched actually um, depicted Rehoboam as a homosexual. The Bible doesn't say that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he was conniving and partying and sleeping and drinking and eating and not doing anything valuable, but doing everything that is rotten with these young men. And these young men wanted to remain in this very comfortable lifestyle that their little friend Rehoboam is organizing for them. They don't want that to change. They are scared. If he's a good king at all, he will stop partying with them and he will start being a grown up man and start being a good king over his people. So, inside of Rehoboam, there was also this seed of the serpent, this seed of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where I want to do what's good and evil for me. I want to decide what is good and what is evil. I want to do what's best for me. I want to reach out my hand and pluck that fruit because it's desirous to the eyes. I want to do what my flesh desire. Therefore, he rejected the counsel of the old men. He rejected basically to be a good king. He rejected to be a servant. So he went to the young men and he said, "What counsel do you give me? What will I answer my people who have spoken to me to say, make the yoke which your father put upon us. Make that heavy yoke. It's heavy, heavy, heavy already. Please make it lighter." And the young men that were grown up with him spoke unto him and said, "Thus shall you speak unto this people that spoke unto you, saying, Your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter unto us. Here is what you will say to them: My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins." Okay, think about this now. His little finger, his pinky, if he puts his pinky next to his father's upper leg, you know, how can the pinky be bigger than the upper leg of his father? My little finger will be bigger than my father's loins. It's impossible. The upper leg of a man is huge. And if you take that part, you put it next to the pinky, it's like a million pinkies can go into one upper leg. And listen to what he's saying. My father's yoke was heavy, and you saw my father's loins. If we compare the heavy yoke that he puts upon you with taxes and hard labor, if we can compare that to the size of his loins, and if I'm telling you, my little finger is going to be bigger than my father's loins. So if his little finger is bigger than his father's loins, how much bigger will his loins be than his father's? That means his burden and his taxes is going to be 100, I don't know, 500 times bigger, because that's how many times bigger a loin is than a pinky. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, like he said, as the king appointed. Come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people roughly. That means he wasn't friendly. He was angry, arrogant, and aggressive. And he forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him. And he spoke to them after the counsel of the young men, and he said, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips. I will chastise you with scorpions. Therefore the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was from Yahuwah, that he might perform what he prophesied, which Yahuwah spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Nobody can blame Yahuwah for causing Rehoboam to be such a piece of rubbish. God didn't make him a piece of rubbish. God didn't make Solomon or David pieces of rubbish. But inside David, and inside Solomon, and inside Rehoboam, there has always been the seed of the serpent as well. because we are made according to the image of Adam. Adam was made according to the image of God. But after Adam, all the sons and daughters born were in the fallen state, the sinful state of Adam and Eve. And we have to fight against that. It is inside of us all the time. We see this throughout the Bible. David was able to kill an innocent man and steal his wife. Solomon forsook Yahuwah and bowed before pagan goddesses and rubbish idols and demons, man. And Rehoboam, he doesn't care one little snitch for his people. He said, my father, when you didn't do your job well, he let his managers beat you with a whip. I'm going to beat you with scorpions. I mean, who's going to allow such a king to rule over them? And that's what we're going to look at in the next session. The division of the kingdom. And if anybody really wants to know what the gospel is, the good news, the angels came to the house of Judah and they said, we have good news to proclaim to all nations. The Son of God is here. Because if you know the law and the prophets, you know that the Messiah will restore the kingdom of David again. We're here in the first book of the Kings, chapter 12. The kingdom is divided. Divided kingdom has to be restored. Can only be done by Yahuwah himself. But it can only be done by dying in the place of the divided kingdom, the sin that the divided kingdom has done. And therefore, that part that Yahuwah decided to manifest in the flesh, that is the gospel. That is the good news. That the way for the kingdom to be restored again is now here. His name is the way. He is the way. He is Yahuwah in the flesh. He is Yahuwah, our Savior. He is Yeshua. And he's the son of David. But unlike Solomon, he will, what he does in his life will cause the kingdom to be restored. In contradiction to what Solomon did in his life to cause the division, to cause the kingdom to be divided. Abba, we have never seen this in church. I have never ever known this in church. It's only when you brought us out of Egypt and you showed us how to read your entire Bible in context. It's only after you have sent us teachers after your own heart, Isaiah 30 verse 21, who showed us the way, that we can understand these deep, deep mysteries of what your kingdom really is. And I praise you for that. I worship you, Almighty Yahuwah Elohim, the God of a restored kingdom of Israel.